Our next guest is a self-proclaimed futurist. Glen Hiemstra is the founder and owner of Futurist.com. He's also the author of Turning the Future into Revenue: What Businesses and Individuals Need to Know to Shape Their Future. Glen, thanks for joining us on this Friday. I know we're going to talk about the future of jobs in just a moment, but first, help me understand the difference between a futurist and, say, an economist or just a strategist. I know you've got some big clients, TIAA, Procter & Gamble. They're just a couple. Why do they need your advice? Clearly, they have their own in-house strategy team.
That is true, but they tend to call futurists, and particularly they call me at Futurist.com when they want to take a longer-term look at the future. So typically they're saying we always look a quarter ahead, or we look 2 years ahead, or we look 3 years ahead, but this time we want to look a decade ahead and kind of stimulate our innovative, creative thinking. And so that's the key difference between futurists and economists, is that we tend to have a longer-term view.
Glen, looking at today's job report, where we saw some hiring in October, better than expected, what sectors and industries, though, are going to be hiring in the next decade?
Well, when I look at where the world is going, not just the U.S., but where the world is going, it's quite obvious that there's going to be continued hiring in healthcare, in particular as the age wave hits. You know, the first baby boomer turns 65 on January 1st in 2011. Then every 8 seconds somebody turns 65. So there's a lot of healthcare coming. That's number one. We're at the beginning of this long transition to the next energy era. So there's going to be hiring in the field of energy engineering and all the related fields. I think the continued movement of people to the cities all around the world is going to happen. So there's going to be construction in cities, but also kind of a reinvention of cities around sustainability.
Glen, while we're talking,
so those are some.
You just mentioned sort of where regionally this is going to happen. Let's talk about the difference between where the jobs are going to be in the developing countries versus, say, the developed countries. And clearly India and China are huge areas of growth. Compare that to U.S. and Europe. What types of jobs, and are they going to be different in the next 10 years?
Well, you know, the U.S. and Europe both have an issue in that we have lots of service sector jobs and some entrepreneurial activity jobs, particularly here in the U.S. But we've hollowed out our manufacturing, and that doesn't seem like it's going to change a whole lot going forward. So we really have to ask what kind of economy do we want? Now, if I had my way, we would tackle some very big projects. For example, we take on the big infrastructure deficit in the country and say we're really going to go all out in the next 10 to 15 years to improve our infrastructure, and that would create more high-paying, construction-oriented engineering-type jobs. But that takes decisions which are not terribly likely in the near term, at least.
Let's talk about the U.S. workforce. How are we going to stay competitive globally? A lot of people have been already talking about education and how we're not educating our kids and preparing them to stay competitive with a lot of the populations in China and in India in particular, where they have a very high level of technical education there. What are we going to be able to do to keep our people competitive?
Well, we have to gear up, and we have to gear up from children to parents to policymakers in terms of improving our ambition. Not just our performance, but our ambition in terms of education. If you look at some simple numbers, in 2014, people going into engineering school now, in 2014, India is expected to graduate about 3 million engineers, China about 1.5 million engineers, and the U.S. only 100,000 engineers. And if you just do that year after year after year, eventually it really has a big impact. And engineering is only part of the picture. But we have to decide as a country, but we also have to decide as individuals and families that we're going to get more ambitious again educationally. Go for higher education attainment, more in math and science, but also in other fields, and just say if we're going to compete in the world, we have to be competitive. We can't just sit back and rest on our history.
All right, Glen Hiemstra, thank you very much for joining us out in Seattle, Washington. You should check out his website. It's Futurist.com. Lots of interesting information there.